South Africa's economy is in bad shape. No amount of sugarcoating can get us out of the double-digit unemployment rates, a stagnant economic outlook which will grow less than 1%, and slow, sometimes cumbersome, right and lackluster efforts in fighting against state capture. All terrible odds on the eve of arguably the toughest election to be fought in 2019. Joining me tonight is two of South Africa's well-known economists, Dr. Thabi Leoka, as well as Dr. Iraj Abedian. We are also going to be joined by Mr. Neil Coleman from the Institute of Economic Justice in Cape Town, and of course Kamal Rambuth. He is a final year student from Wits, who is the co-founder at the Rethinking Economics for Africa, and he's also, of course, joining us here in our Johannesburg panel. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you, good evening, and of course, as always, my sparring partner, Peter Bruce.
We're in august company.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Now, of course, it's official. We are in a technical recession, but both President Ramaphosa and the Finance Minister said there's nothing to panic about. Let's just quickly listen to President Ramaphosa.
It's not lost, and I don't believe that a full recession will take hold in South Africa. But then again, our economy is facing its own challenges, which we have to respond to. Government is going to be responding to the challenges that we are facing. We are finalizing a stimulus package that we will soon be announcing to inject impetus and growth in our economy. South Africans should not feel despondent. This is not a full-blown recession. This is just a technical one, and it's technical because of the agriculture figures, which are going to be corrected in the next quarter. And government will respond to this situation that we are facing now.
Now, of course, the president emphasizing that it's a technical recession. Dr. Leoka, let me start with you. I mean, is this just semantics? We are in trouble, aren't we?
We are. So I wouldn't say it's just a technical recession. Usually if it's just one quarter, I'd say maybe there's a rebound. But when half of the year is in a recession, it's a problem. And I'll tell you what a recession does. Recession increases unemployment. Already we have unemployment that is north of 27%. And if you include the discouraged workers, that's 37%. So in a recession will worsen that. Recession also impacts on growth of income. So already we know that per capita income in South Africa is in a decline, and it's been in a decline for many years. Recession impacts on the way households behave. So if you, for instance, cannot borrow from a bank and there's, the households are in a depression, that means that it'll impact on small businesses and the creation of small businesses. Small businesses should be the heartbeat of an economy. We should actually be growing through small businesses. And lastly, investments. It impacts on investments. If there is a recession, it impacts on production capacity of an investment. It also impacts on technology and technological advancement in a country. So I don't understand why it is not a worrisome problem for government, but I'm very worried.
Yes.
I mean, when your heart stops beating, you technically and really dead, right? I mean, so it's... what I'm interested to know, Iraj Abedian, if there is going to be a stimulus, that means you put money or liquidity, I presume, into the economy. And where would they find that at this stage? I mean, have they got any money?
I think, Peter, with the greatest respect, the term stimulus is inappropriate for the conditions that our economy is in. Right. Stimulus is usually dealing with cyclical downturn in the economy. In other words, the rest of the economy is okay. All you have to do is to invest here and invest there and inject a bit of fiscal or monetary stimulus, and hence the term package, stimulus package. I would suggest that we should actually discard that. That's just ignorance. What we need is a turnaround strategy. This is an economy that's been robbed for 10 years, destroyed institutionally, confidence is drained out of it, and quite frankly, and this is a real issue, just about none of our sectors is investment ready.
Yeah.
Assuming government had money, assuming Chinese, Japanese, Americans, everybody brought the money. Can you take it to the mining sector? There are all sorts of question marks. The agriculture, question mark, you just had a debate. Water, energy, and. So we haven't got the economy investment ready. Never mind that the government has got fiscal stress, can't even bail out its state-owned enterprises that have been made bankrupt.
Well, when all the money from the American stimulus packages, the amount of money they pumped into the world, when some of it came here, you're quite right. We didn't do anything with it, did we?
We couldn't.
It's now all gone back.
I want to bring in Neil Coleman, who's joining us from Cape Town. He's, of course, from the Centre for Economic Justice. Many economists are agreed that we are in trouble, but not everyone agrees on what's the best route out. And we've often found ourselves in that tension debate, very driven by ideology, very little practical explanations and examples of how to get out of the problem. Neil, you have an alternative view. You express a different view from your, let's say, traditional economists that talk to the market for all the answers. You must agree we are in trouble. What is the way forward? What is the best way out of this recession as far as you are concerned?
Yes, Karima, I think the reality is that even if we had come up with second quarter improvement in the GDP, the economy would still be in crisis. This economy has been in crisis for many, many years now. So the issues are not, as Iraj was saying, they're not cyclical, they're structural, and therefore they require structural transformation. So it's about changing the trajectory of our growth path. The issue is not just the quantum of economic growth, but the composition of that growth. We, for example, are talking today about Africa rising, about high growth rates in certain parts of the continent. But what impact is that having on ordinary people in those societies? Sure. We saw in the mid-2000s quite high growth rates in South Africa, but at the same time we saw persistently high levels of poverty, unemployment, and in fact growing inequality in our society. So there's something fundamentally wrong with the trajectory of our economy. And it's about really the need for a new strategy for industrialization, for shifting our dependence on commodity prices, for dealing with the problem of financialization of our economy and those sorts of questions. So unfortunately, there are no quick fixes to the situation that we face. And the repetition of the old mantras, if you like, the neoclassical economic proposals, is not going to get us out of this crisis. It's simply that old problem of trying the same thing and expecting different results. So we need fresh new thinking, and that's what we hope the Institute for Economic Justice and the Rethinking Economics movement will try to inject into this debate.
Well, that's a good way to segue into you, Kamal. You're looking out of the box. You're looking at different ways of talking about growth and, of course, redistribution and greater equality and inclusion in the economy. What is your institution and movement thinking that is going to be the one thing that we can do differently from what we've done historically to try and get the stagnant economy growing and to create the jobs and, more importantly, to deal with inequality?
Well, Karima, I think that what we're saying as a student organization and as a student movement is that the economics that we're taught in our universities doesn't equip us with the understanding or the skills to deal with problems we face in our society. Most undergraduate economics courses throughout the country are only taught through one perspective, and that's a neoclassical perspective. Well, in reality, there's 9 different schools of thought. And if I were to just relate that to the crisis we're in currently, is that, you know, who saw the crisis of us having no growth? Who saw it coming, right? And I asked Araj before, and Tabio herself has said that, they didn't see it coming up until we're in the quarter. While there are economists around, such as Chris Malikane, such as Duma Ubule, who say that they saw this coming a while ago, right? And they aren't educated in that neoclassical frame of thought. They are what you would call heterodox economists. And what we're saying is that we can't just be taught one school of thought. We've got serious problems in this country, and we need to be taught as many schools of thought that we can, so that we can approach these problems in a way that's critical, that is pluralist, and a way that is decolonized in many ways.
Peter, I'm going to do the interviewing for you.
Right.
You have put forward your state capitalism or stakeholder capitalism concept as an idea. You spent a lot of time in Spain where this was experimented with.
Or
Do you
Germany
think
as well,
this is one thing that we should give a try, give a go in South Africa?
Well, I think we can be much more inclusive in our economy than we are. Interestingly enough, it's often the unions that resist inclusivity in terms of going on to boards of companies, as they do in Germany, because they don't want to be co-opted. We mustn't underestimate the extent to which people are comfortable in their foxholes. Yeah. It's good to be able to shout at business, good to be able for business to knock the unions. I just can't see a way out of it. We are not going to industrialize this economy. There's nothing that we can make that anyone would want to buy. I mean, we don't have a big enough economy to become a world leader in things. We are small. China, America, Brazil. You can experiment on hundreds of millions of people before you go, so that you can become a leader in computer chips or whatever it might be. How we can't industrialize. It's not going to happen.
I see Tavi shaking her head here. Dr.
I do
Livoka?
disagree, and I think that if you look at South Korea, is exactly what South Africa is in terms of the small population size and what it's done to turn its economy around. I think that we have definitely not looked at bottom-up growth, and we should do that. We should look at not only just the education, but also investing money in poorer and low-income households and development. And industrialization can help, especially when employment is involved. It tends to employ a lot more people.
You've just got to sell your stuff to somebody.
But there's the rest of the continent, which we haven't really tapped into, and we've been watching China for many, many years go onto the continent and invest. And we haven't created stuff that can go into the rest of the continent. But I also think there are many other ways that we can actually stimulate the economy. I agree with actually what everybody has said, including what Mr. Coleman has said. But there's been tension between the private sector and government, and over the years. And I always say it's not necessarily government's role in creating jobs.
Yeah.
It's the business sector. And what has the business sector done to revive the economy? And I think that it's time for the two to come together and find a solution.
But that's been precisely our problem, Iraj. You and I have spoken about this often. There is a trust chasm. There's a massive deficit. We saw it in the ugly, violent strikes that led to the Marikana massacre and the killings of people. We see it now again when we're talking about what to do with state-owned companies. What is at the root of this trust deficit?
Well, depending who you ask, you'll get different questions. The history, it goes all the way to colonialism, to racism, to lack of communication, and to lack of participation. I mean, we have a situation where the financial sector, which is the most resourceful from a funding point of view, which sits on the national savings pool, is disengaged from the real economy. How do you grow? Whether you want to industrialize or not, we mustn't get into semantics. We got to say we have a resource base which in proportion to our population is super rich. Are we using it for the benefit of all? Are we restructuring? Call it whatever you like, rethink, reimagine, restructure. But very quickly, as we saw in this discussion, very quickly we're very good at creating tension ideologically, and we're creating new ideology. Whereas we got to say we have a resource base, What can we do with that resource base? Unless we get our savings channeled into reaching the small businesses, medium businesses, big businesses, right across, at the same time, getting our public sector, which is more than half of our GDP spent, get it efficient and effective and ethical. We can reimagine the economy, whatever you want. You get corrupt government, inefficient government, dysfunctional municipalities, and all the shenanigans that in the name of politics and so on goes on, no economy can grow. No ideology can prevail.
I want to bring Neil in from Cape Town. This question of the importance of institutions is critical. We've seen 10 years of institutions being eked out. Our revenue capacity, our ability to collect revenue, for example, to provide those very goods and services have been severely compromised. How important is that in the fight to also think out of the box, to look at different pathways to get to inclusive growth, Neil?
No, it is very important. There's no doubt. I mean, if we look at our public sector, it's now become the whipping boy. Everybody's saying that it's bloated, it's crowding out investment. But the reality is that we have about 200,000 vacancies in the public service, where critical frontline delivery posts are not being filled, whereas we have a fat bureaucracy at the top. So it needs a reconfiguration and reorganization of the public service, just as we need a reorganization of our state-owned enterprises. The question is, what is the logic that's driving these structures? And the problem is that we have both the inheritance of an old bureaucratic sort of dependence on consultants and contracting out, etc., etc. And we now have the added problem of a predatory elite, which is draining resources from the state sector. But we equally have the private sector draining the resources from the country. So we need to look at the challenge of state capture and corruption more broadly in terms of reappropriating that surplus for what it's supposed to do, i.e. investing in the productive economy and delivering services to people.
When we're discussing all these big meta questions and time flies by, Peter, you've got the last word.
Oh, really? Oh, gosh. Well, I mean, it's true, and Neil is absolutely right. There's a lot of things that we need to do, and the state can work better, and the private sector can work better. And as Kamal has said, you know, it's lovely to hear somebody thinking new. What we need to do as South Africans is listen to each other and not block each other out what we're saying. I mean, I've thought of a smart aleck remark, retort to what you were saying about Duma Kubula and his forecast of a recession. We can all take each other down. It's easy. We need to sit down and really try and listen without interrupting what we're saying, because everybody wants this country to succeed. People want to live here. Now, people don't want to go and live in England. It's miserable. And you know, there's a way to get this right. We're not the worst country in the world. We're not a disaster. We're in a recession, Mr. President, and it's real and it's not technical. But we should be able to have a proper adult discussion about a new kind of economy. That's ours, not inherited from 200 years ago.
Sure.
Absolutely. Lady and gentlemen, thank you so very much. But before we go, we just want to put up a cartoon which we thought kind of just, epitomized the kind of thinking that's happening in the country. Let's have a look.
The driver says, don't panic, it's just a technical recession.
Well, that's where we leave it. Thank you so very much. The Fix continues after the break.